My name is Margaret Louise Harper. I'm a retired school teacher, a grandmother to 3 beautiful kids, and someone who's lived with a secret buried deep in her chest for over 5 decades. People see me now and think I'm just another sweet old lady who knits scarves and watch. I was only 16 when I found out I was pregnant. I still remember the trembling in my fingers when I held that tiny white test in the cramped high school restroom. The pink line appeared so faint, so quick, but I just knew. At that age, girls like me weren't expected to become mothers. We were expected to become wives, secretaries, nurses, getting pregnant before marriage in tea. When I told my mother, her expression didn't crack, not even a flinch. She simply closed her eyes, let out a slow breath, and said, "Don't tell your father." That's when I knew I was on my own. Days later, my father found out anyway. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just looked at me like I wasn't his daughter anymore, like I'd turned into something filthy. And that was the last time we ever really spoke. He stopped making eye contact. He stopped saying my name. I stopped going to school shortly after that. Health reasons, they told the principal. But everyone knew. I could feel the judgment from across the street, in the grocery store, at church. I became a ghost in my own town. I wanted to keep my baby. I didn't care if it meant a harder life. I already loved her. I could feel her fluttering inside me like tiny angel wings. I'd whisper to her at night, alone in my bedroom, promising I'd take care of her, that no matter what, she'd be loved. I even gave her a name, Lila. But my family had always, my belly grew, my parents grew colder. I wasn't allowed to go out anymore. My mother refused to look at me during dinner. My father barely acknowledged I was alive, but they were making arrangements behind my back, plans I wouldn't discover until it was too late. The night I went into labor, my mother came into my room with a suitcase and said, "You're coming with me, now." I didn't know where we were going, but I was in pain, and scared, and didn't question her. We drove 3 hours away, to some clinic I'd never seen before. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a courthouse with beds. I was forced into a room with no windows. The nurses were silent, robotic. They didn't ask me my name. They didn't tell me what was happening. When I begged to see my baby after delivery, they just said, "She's being taken care of. You need to rest." And when I woke up hours later, in a strange bed, my mother sat beside me, holding my hand like a stranger. "She didn't survive," she said softly. "It's over now." I screamed, I cried, I begged, but my cries were ignored. The staff sedated me, and just like that, my baby was gone. I was 16, alone, lied to, and forever broken. That's the beginning of my story. I wish I could say I was strong after they told me she was only 16. Remember, my body had just gone through childbirth. My mind was foggy, my emotions scrambled. I was in physical pain and emotional agony. And the people who were supposed to protect me, my own parents, were the ones who orchestrated the entire thing. They planned everything behind closed doors, whispered to doctors, paid whoever they had. My mother said, "You'll thank us one day. She would have had a terrible life with you." I remember staring at her, hollow, as if she were a stranger, wearing my mother's face. They justified it, over and over. "She's with a family who can give her more. You'll move on. You'll have a future now. You're too young to be a mother. And worst of all, we saved you from ruining your life." But they didn't save me. They destroyed me. When I got home from that facility, everything was erased like it never happened. The crib Miss Evelyn had gifted me was gone. The baby clothes vanished. Even the letters I had written to Lila, gone. My room looked the same as it had before, but I didn't. I had changed. I had aged decades in days. Church, my mother, told everyone I'd gone to visit a sick aunt. No one spoke of a baby. No one looked at my stomach. I was just supposed to pretend that everything was normal, that I wasn't waking up screaming from nightmares, that I didn't still feel phantom kicks in my belly, that I wasn't haunted by lullabies I never got to sing. I tried asking questions once. I waited until my father was alone in the garage and asked him, "Did you even see her? Do you know where she went?" He didn't answer. He just walked away. That silence screamed louder than any words. Miss Evelyn knew something was wrong. She came by once, bringing cookies and gentle eyes. I tried to tell her, but my mother stood in the doorway like a guard. Evelyn never came back. I later found out she was encouraged to keep her distance. My parents had rewritten my story, without me, and they expected me to play my part. Eventually, I was pushed back into school, expected to graduate, get a job, find a husband, settle down, but nothing was ever the same. How could it be? I had brought life into the world, and they had taken her from me, without even letting me hold her, and worst of all, they convinced themselves they had done the right thing. That was the beginning of the story they told for decades. She's better off. We had no choice. She wasn't ready to be a mother, but I knew better, because a mother knows, even when the world calls you too young, too poor, too weak. I never stopped feeling her. Not for a second. People think grief fades with time. That if you just live long enough, the sharpness dulls, the memory softens, and life becomes livable again. But losing a child under a lie, being told your baby is dead when she's actually alive, that kind of grief doesn't fade, it festers, it grows roots. For years, I lived with two versions of the truth, the one they gave me, and the one I felt in my bones. They told me my baby had died, that I never even got to hold her, that she never took a breath. But every cell in my body rejected that idea. I would wake in the night drenched in sweat, reaching for her. I dreamed of her crying, her arms reaching toward me, but she was always just out of reach. And when I woke up, the ache in my arms, that empty, heavy ache, felt more real than anything else in my life. I tried to move on. I got a job at a local bakery. I met a kind man, Thomas, and Thomas wanted children. So did I. We had two beautiful, healthy, and so very loved. But nothing ever filled the space in my heart where Lila should have been. I'd hold my babies close, but always with the nagging question, where is my first? I became good at pretending. I smiled at birthday parties. I clapped at school plays. I laughed when other moms joked about the chaos of parenting. But inside, I was carrying a coffin full of memories that had never even been made. The lie became my second skin. It followed me to every job, every dinner, every family gathering. My parents aged without ever speaking her name again. My mother would knit blankets for my younger children, never acknowledging the one she helped erase. On Leela's would-be birthdays, I'd sneak away from the house, sit in the park, and whisper apologies to the wind. I'm sorry, baby. I did 1 year, when she would have been 10. I wrote her a letter I never sent. I poured out everything, how much I missed her, how every lullaby I sang to her siblings was secretly meant for her. I tucked the letter into a shoebox, wrapped it in ribbon, and hid it in the attic. That box eventually filled with letters, dozens of them. My silent testimony. Every so often, I'd catch a girl in town, same age, same eyes, and wonder, could it be, could she be mine? The worst part of living with a lie is the silence. It isolates you. I couldn't tell my husband. I couldn't tell my children. I couldn't talk to friends. No one knew. No one saw. But Lila was always there, in the songs on the radio, in the way the sun hit the curtains, in the scent of baby lotion that would randomly stir old memories. I was haunted not by ghosts, but by possibilities. What if she was alive and hated me? What if she thought I abandoned her? What if she was waiting for me, just as I was waiting for her? 30 years passed, 30 birthdays, 30 Christmas mornings, 30 Mother's Days with one less card, one less phone call, one less hug. That was the lie they told. But I never stopped hearing the truth whisper in the back of my heart, she's alive. And one day, I decided to listen. For a long time, I searched quietly without maps, without names, without even knowing where to begin. How do you find someone when the world has erased their existence and told you to move on? It started with a gut feeling I could no longer suppress. I knew my daughter was out there, not just in dreams or daydreams, but somewhere real. Walking street. By this time, I was in my 40s. My children were grown. My husband, Thomas, still had no idea what had happened to me before we met. He knew I carried some old sadness, but I never gave it a name. I couldn't not, until I knew the truth. So I started with what little I had. Memory. I remembered the clinic, the gray walls, the cold room, the nurse's name tag, Karen. It wasn't much, but it was something. I tried calling hospitals, pretending I was doing family genealogy work. I asked for records, archives, anything. Most places said the same thing. That information is sealed. Or worse, we have no record of a birth under that name. Some nights, I'd lie awake, replaying every second of that night in my mind, hoping something would come to me, some overlooked detail. Then came the internet. At first, it was overwhelming. Forums, databases, reunification registries. But as I scrolled through post after post from women like me and from children searching for their mothers, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe, just maybe, she was looking too. I created a profile under a pseudonym and joined several adoption reunion websites. I wrote out everything I remembered: my age at the time, the hospital location, the approximate date of birth, and the name I gave her, Leela. Weeks went by, then months, then years, and nothing. But I kept trying. I started journaling, documenting everything in case she ever did find me and wanted to know the truth. I wrote about how much I missed her, how I was tricked and betrayed, how every day without her felt like breathing through broken glass. Once, I found a young woman's post that made my heart stop. She had been adopted, born the same week Leela would have been, same state, similar story. I stared at her photo for hours. She had my eyes, but when I reached out, I received a kind message in return. I found my birth mom last year. I hope you find yours too. My heart shattered, but I didn't stop. I even considered hiring a private investigator, but the cost was more than I could afford. Still, every few weeks, I searched the same online databases, hoping for a new post, a new clue, a sign that Lila existed and that maybe she still thought of me. All the while, I kept this search secret. My family, my friends, no one knew. It became my silent mission, my quiet war. The thing I did when everyone else was asleep and I was alone with the memories. Sometimes I'd whisper to the wind, "I'm coming, baby, I'm trying." The silence was deafening, but I never stopped listening, never stopped hoping. And then one day, I found something, a name, a photo, a woman. My heart skipped. She looked just like me, but I'll tell you more about that in the next part of this story, because that was the moment everything changed. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The sky was cloudy, and I remember hearing the ticking of the kitchen clock louder than usual. I had just brewed a cup. I logged into one of the adoption reunion websites I had been part of for years. I almost didn't check the messages. I had been so disappointed before, but I did. And there it was, a message. The subject line read, "I think you might be my mother." My heart stopped. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, afraid to click, afraid to breathe. I finally opened it with trembling hands. "Hello," it began. "My name is Sarah, but I was born in 1973 in a private clinic outside of Nashville. I was told my birth mother was a teenager and that the adoption was handled privately. I've been searching for her for years, and I came across a profile you made. Something about your story felt familiar. I hope this message finds you well. I'm not sure if you're the one I'm looking for, but I had to try. Double quotes, Sarah Duff. She even included a photo. I stared at that was her. I knew it. That was my Leela. I couldn't even respond at first. My hands were shaking too much. I sobbed harder than I had in years. Not the kind of crying that you can hold in, but the ugly, heaving, broken kind that rattles the soul. When I finally gathered myself, I wrote back, "Dear Sarah, I think you are my daughter. I gave birth to a baby girl on June 14, 1973, in a clinic outside of Nashville. I was 16. My parents told me you had died. They never let me hold you. I never believed them." It took 2 days for her to reply. "2 of the longest days of my life," she wrote back. "I think I've found you too." And just like that, the lie I had lived with for 30 years began to unravel. Sarah told me she always had questions. Her adoptive parents were kind people, but they were vague about her past. They told her her mother was too young to care for her, and that it was best for everyone. But she said she always felt something missing. She had started looking into her birth records in her 20s but kept hitting walls. It was only after her adoptive parents passed away that she found a small envelope tucked in a box of family documents, her original birth certificate, sealed for decades, listing only the name of the clinic and my first name, Margaret. That was all she had, and she followed it like a thread, pulling and pulling until it led her to me. When I asked how she felt, knowing the truth, she said, angry, confused, but mostly relieved. She had wondered for so long if she was unwanted, if she had been abandoned, and to hear that I had loved her, that I had wanted her, gave her something she never thought she'd have, peace. But along with the truth came pain. I told her everything about my parents, the lies, the clinic, the life I was forced to live without her. She cried. I cried. We grieved all over again, 4, she told me she had children of her own, 2 boys. I cried harder when I realized I was a grandmother. Again, 2 strangers who shared my blood. That day changed everything. The years of silence were broken, the shadows lifted, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel alone. But this wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. Asterisk. Our first meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon in early spring. We had been exchanging messages for weeks, each one bringing us closer, but still, nothing could have prepared. Chose a small cafe halfway between our towns. I wore my best blue dress, the one Thomas always said made my eyes shine. I sat at the corner table by the window, my hands shaking as I held a cup of coffee I couldn't bring to my lips. And then, the door opened. She walked in, tall, poised, and beautiful. Her hair was thick and wavy like mine used to be, her skin, the same warm tone, but it was her eyes that stopped me. They were mine. She saw me instantly. We both froze for a moment, as if the world had stopped spinning. Then, like magnets, we moved toward each other. I stood up, she dropped her purse, and we embraced, not gently, not cautiously, but fully, desperately, like 2 people who had been waiting a lifetime for that moment. I thought I'd forgotten your scent, I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks, but I haven't. I swear I haven't. She pulled back, her eyes watery. You look just like I imagined, like me. We sat, and for a long while, we just stared at each other. I memorized her every feature, the small scar on her chin. But then came the hard part, because even though we shared blood, we didn't share memories. I didn't know her favorite song, or how she liked her coffee, or what she looked like when she laughed as a child. She didn't know how I smelled when I held her as a baby, or what lullabies I would have sung, or the kind of mother I would have been. We had to bridge a chasm of 30 lost years. She told me about her life, the good and the bad. Her adoptive parents had been kind, but distant. Her teenage years were rough. She always felt like a piece of her was missing, especially when people asked, "Where do you get your eyes from?" She had no answer. Until now, I told her about my life too, about my marriage, my other children, and the pain I carried. I showed her the box of letters I had written her over the years, never knowing if she'd ever read them. She cried as she read each one. "You never stopped loving me," she whispered. "Not for a second," I said. But the reunion wasn't just joy and tears, it was also awkward. At times, we didn't know what to say. At times, she looked away, overwhelmed, and I understood. Because even though we were mother and daughter, we were also strangers, navigating a love that had no roadmap. Still, we tried. Over the next few months, we met often. We went for walks, shared stories, laughed, cried again. Slowly, piece by piece, we started building a new kind of relationship, not as a traditional mother and daughter, but as 2 women bound by truth, pain, and a love that refused to die. She introduced me to her children, my grandsons. When the youngest called me grandma, I had to excuse myself and cry in the hallway. It was overwhelming, but beautiful. I still mourn what was lost. I'll always mourn it. 30 years of birthdays, scraped knees, first crushes, heartbreaks, all lived without me. But I now have today. I have tomorrow. And for the first time in decades, I have hope. After we reunited, I spent many nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying what could have been. What did her first words sound like? Who rocked her to sleep when she had colic? Was she afraid of thunderstorms, like I was at her age? What lullabies did she grow up with? Were they anything like the ones I had practiced for her in my head? 30 years of her life. I missed the moment she first opened her eyes. I missed her first laugh, her first step. I missed the time she broke her arm at 7. I missed the day she got her period and probably needed her mother the most. I missed her childhood. I missed her becoming a woman. And I missed the day she became a mother herself. These weren't just moments in a scrapbook. They were chapters I was supposed to help write. Instead, I was left with blank pages, and no matter how much she shared now, I couldn't go back and relive them with her. She showed me pictures, baby photos, school portraits, prom night, her wedding day. I smiled and nodded, but inside, it felt like someone was twisting a knife in my heart. There she was, my daughter, growing up without knowing I existed, smiling in photos that I should have taken, holding hands with people who got to call themselves it. Wasn't her fault. I never blamed her, but it hurt. God, it hurt, even now. When I hear a woman mention how her daughter called her for advice, or dropped by with the grandkids, I feel a sting of jealousy. I'll never get those ordinary mother-daughter routines, the phone calls just to chat, the Sunday dinners, the fights over curfews. We're learning each other now, in our own way, but the foundation is gone. We're building something beautiful, yes, but it's a second story without a ground floor. I sometimes wonder if I'm allowed to grieve this way. After all, she's alive, she's back in my life. I should be grateful, and I am, but gratitude doesn't erase the ache. It doesn't silence the voice inside that whispers, we should have had more. I've learned that grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it's silence at dinner. Sometimes it's a long pause after she calls me mom, as I try not to cry. Sometimes it's avoiding mirrors because I see her face in mine and wonder who she could have become if we'd had each other sooner. She told me she had a hard time calling me mom. At first it felt foreign. I told her that was okay, that I understood, because truthfully, I didn't feel like a mother, not in the way the world defines it. I was more like a ghost finally given a body, trying to learn how to live again. And yet, every little moment we've had since, every lunch, every message, every story, has stitched us closer together. It's not perfect, it never will be, but it's ours, and that has to be enough, because we've already lost too much time. I won't let the next 30 years go by the same way. When I finally learned the full truth about what happened to my daughter, the shock was like a second betrayal, not just by fate, but by my own family, and that pain ran deeper than anything I had felt in all those silent years. My parents had always told me she died. No explanation, no warning, no funeral. Just a statement delivered in cold, final words. The baby didn't survive. I was 16, alone, weak. I believed them, or at least, I tried to. But now, with Sarah back in my life, I needed answers. And those answers weren't buried in hospital files or old birth certificates. They were buried in the people who raised me. My mother had passed by then, but my father was still alive. We hadn't spoken in years, but I couldn't let this go unanswered. I needed to hear it from him. So, I visited. When I walked into his small apartment, he looked older than I remembered, frailer, quieter. But when I brought up the baby, his expression hardened like stone. Why dig that up now? He muttered. I pressed. I told him I knew. I told him she was alive, and his eyes shifted. And then, for the first time in my life, he confessed. He said, they thought they were doing what was best for me, that having a baby at 16 would ruin my life, that they didn't trust me to raise a child, that a family in another town had offered to take the baby, raise her well, and never contact us again. Everything was arranged quietly, discreetly. They paid the clinic to make the paperwork disappear, and they made me believe my baby was dead, because they thought it would be easier. Easier. That word echoed in my skull. Do you know what you did to me? I whispered, my voice shaking. Do you know what you took from me? He didn't answer. He just looked down at his hands, wrinkled and weak, and said, we thought we were saving you, but they weren't saving me. They were saving themselves, from shame, from scandal, from the inconvenience of raising a teenage mother in their pristine household. I left that day broken all over again. The betrayal wasn't just in the past, it was alive and breathing, sitting across from me, with gray hair and guilt in his eyes. I later found out that other relatives knew to my aunt, one of my cousins. They had all been told to stay quiet, and they did. For 30 years, they let me grieve a daughter I was never allowed to know. They smiled at birthdays, hugged me at weddings, and never once said a word. It wasn't just silence, it was conspiracy. And, while I try to forgive for my own peace, part of me will never forget that those closest to me were the ones who helped erase a part of my soul. My daughter was stolen, not by strangers, but by the people who raised me. After the flood of emotions following our reunion, I felt something shift between us. Sarah and I had cried together, laughed through awkward silences, and sat through long moments of nothingness, just to be in the same room. But there was still a part of me that hadn't been ready to hear her side. The story of what she had lived, what she had carried for 3 decades. One evening, as we sat in her backyard watching her boys chase fireflies, she said, "Can I tell you everything now?" From my side, I nodded, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, bracing myself. She began slowly, choosing her words carefully. "My adoptive parents were nice," she said. "They gave me everything, a stable home, food, good schools, but I always felt off. like something didn't quite fit. They loved me, but there was a barrier. They never talked about where I came from. They used phrases like, your real mom couldn't keep you, or you were given away because it was best. I carried those words like weights. I listened, my throat tight, guilt burning behind my eyes. On birthdays, I'd cry without knowing why. I'd stare into the mirror and ask, do I look like her? Is she out there thinking about me? She said that she had asked questions growing up, but her adoptive parents, when her adoptive father died, she found paperwork, a different name, a clinic address, and a sealed letter marked, to be opened only if she asks. That letter didn't come from me, it came from the adoption lawyer. It confirmed that the adoption was private and arranged under unique family circumstances. She told me the language made her feel like a transaction. For a long time, I thought maybe you just didn't want me, she said, but I never believed that in my heart. I reached across the table and held her hand. I never stopped wanting you, I whispered. I just didn't know how to find you. She cried then. Not loud sobs, but silent, exhausted tears, like a dam breaking quietly after holding too much for too long. She told me about how she feared being abandoned again, how every relationship she ever had felt temporary. She admitted she was terrified of me, too, of getting close, of being disappointed, of hearing that I hadn't fought for her. But when I showed her the journal I had kept, the letters I had written year after year, she finally believed I had fought, even if the war had been rigged against me. That night, we didn't say much more. She rested her head on my shoulder as the stars came out. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a stranger sitting beside my daughter. I felt like her mother, because she had shared her pain, and I had honored it. Not with apologies alone, but with truth. After everything, the pain, the lies, the stolen years, the most surprising part wasn't the heartbreak. It was the healing, because despite all we'd lost, there was still love. And that love, though cautious and fragile, began to bloom. Again. Sarah and I started seeing each other regularly. At first, our visits were careful, like two people tiptoeing around shards of glass. We didn't want to say the wrong thing, ask too much, push too hard, but every time she smiled, every time she sent me a text just to say, thinking of you, I felt a part of my heart knit itself back together. She invited me to her home more often. I watched Hebot. Loving again wasn't easy. There were moments when we argued, when old wounds reopened. Once, she asked me why I didn't fight harder. It shattered me, because how could I explain the fear, the control my parents had over me? The fact that I was a child myself, powerless and broken. I didn't know how. I told her. I was scared of losing everything. And in the end, I did. She cried that night, but she didn't walk away. And neither did I. It took time, real time, to earn her trust, to earn the right to be in her life, not just as a symbol of what was lost, but as someone she could lean on now. And it also meant I had to forgive myself. For years, I carried shame like a stone around my neck. I had been convinced that I'd failed as a mother, that I hadn't done enough, but hearing Sarah say, you did your best, and I'm here now, freed me. She gave me permission to love her fully, not from a distance, not in secret, but as her mother. We started creating new memories. She brought me to her son's school play. We had a girls' night with wine and old movies. She even let me braid her hair once, something I never got to do when she was little. And though we both knew we could never get those 30 years back, we finally stopped counting what was missing and started cherishing what was left. Love, in its purest form, is resilient. It bends, it breaks, but it doesn't disappear. And in our case, it came back. Different, yes, quieter, more mature, and rooted in sorrow, but still love. The kind that whispers, you're still mine. The kind that holds your hand through the pain. The kind that rebuilds, one moment at a time. If I could go back in time and speak to the girl I was frightened, confused, clutching her belly and hoping for a future, I would hold her hand and say, they will try to take everything from you, but they cannot take your love. Because love, real love, survives even the deepest betrayal. And now, as a woman with decades behind her and the wisdom of grief etched, I see you. I believe you. And you are not alone. Maybe they told you it was better that way, that you were too young, too poor, too broken to raise a child. Maybe they never let you hold her. Maybe they told you she died when she didn't. Maybe your own family turned you into a secret. And maybe, like me, you carried that emptiness in silence through birthdays missed, milestones unseen, lullabies never sung. I want you to know that your grief is real, that your pain matters, that you are allowed to cry even decades later. There is no expiration date on sorrow, and there is no shame in still loving a child who doesn't even know you exist. If you're still searching, don't give up. If you've found them and don't know how to begin, just start small. A message, a letter, a prayer whispered into the dark dot, and if they don't want to meet you yet or ever, that does not make you less of a mother. You loved them from the beginning. That's enough. To every stolen mother, your story matters, even if no one else believed you. I do, because I lived it to . And now, I am finally learning to breathe again, to love again, to forgive, not just others, but myself. This letter is for all the years you've spent feeling like a ghost, for all the questions you were never allowed to ask, for all the names you whispered into the wind hoping they'd hear you. You were always a mother, you still are, you always will be if you've made it to the end of my story. Thank you. Thank you for listening to a tale not just of heartbreak, but of survival, of love buried and resurrected, of 30 years of silence finally broken by truth. I know I'm not the only one who's lived something like this. Maybe your story is different. Ty, want to say this now, with all the strength I have left in me, you are not alone. Whether you were a teenage girl stripped of choices, or a grown woman still waiting to be heard, or a mother who wonders if she'll ever get the chance to say, I love you, I see you, I am you, and there's power in telling your truth. So if you feel like no one would care, let me tell you something. Someone out there is waiting to hear what you have to say. Someone is searching for a voice like yours to know they're not crazy, not weak, not broken. If this story moved you, please share it, leave a comment, tell me your story. Let's build a space where women, mothers, daughters, and survivors can speak without fear, where pain can be named, where silence no longer wins. And if you're just now beginning your journey, whether it's reconnecting with a child, forgiving yourself, or finally breaking free from the lies they told you, take it one step at a time. Healing is not linear, it's messy and painful and beautiful all at once, but it's worth it, because the truth is, they may have stolen our moments, but they will never steal our voices again. So from one heartbroken mother to another, hold on, speak up, keep going, and never forget, you're not alone in your pain.